Assist, a helping hand with your land.
Neil from Essex here to talk through the 3-point hitch on the back of your tractor today and to go through and explain a couple of mistakes that we see guys make when they're putting their attachments on the back of the tractor for the first time. So first we're going to run through some simple adjustment points and terminology for your 3-point hitch. And this stuff is all basically the same whether you're talking a 20 horsepower tractor or a 300 horsepower tractor. The parts of the 3-point are all the same. There are some differences in what's called the category of the 3-point that's going to define the size of the balls and really kind of say whether this is going to be a tractor going into landscaping or draft tasks, really depending on the size of the hardware itself and the capacities that it's going to have. As far as the pieces themselves go, you're going to have your lower links, which is your 2 bottom arms. Some of these are going to be adjustable here. Adjustable links, some of them are going to be fixed, usually defined by a standard or a deluxe tractor. The top piece up here is going to be called your top link, and these are going to have pins in the top and the bottom here in order to attach to your implement. And then on the outside of the lower links, you're going to have sway bars, and there's generally 2 different types of sway bars. There's one done with threaded rods. It's usually the cheaper version, and then there's a nicer, more deluxe version done with sway bars where you're going to have 2 rods that slide in and out of each other with holes across them in order to lock your implements into place. So that's just your basic terminology on the parts of a 3-point hitch. When you back up to a piece of equipment and put things under your 3-point hitch, there's a lot of difficulty sometimes in getting things too tight or too loose on the back of your tractor. And there's some places where it's okay to have a little bit of slop in play, and there's some places where you don't want slop in play. One place you don't want it is on the balls of the 3-point hitch itself, and this is where bushings come into play. So if you're switching categories, say you have a category 2 tractor and you're putting on a category 1 implement, you're going to need a bushing in order to put over top of the pins in order to take up the space inside of the balls. While you'd be able to take that larger category 2 ball and fit it over top of the category 1 pin, it's going to slop around in there and over prolonged use potentially egg out or damage the ends of those 3-point hitch arms. So putting that bushing in there is important. You can also use bushings as well though when you're staying within your category. So your category 1 ends with a category 1 implement. A lot of those implements are going to have pins that are really long or might have a gap inside of them. It was the case with mowers a lot of times. You might have a 4-inch place in order to put this arm into, and that arm is going to be able to slide back and forth, and you can use some of those bushings in order to take up that space to make sure things aren't racking back and forth inside of the pin. You will see some funny memes floating around the internet sometimes in reference to these spring pins. These things can really hurt your fingers if you're not careful, so you do want to watch. Here's your safety warning for all of the safety police out there. When you go ahead and put one of these things in and flip it over, they are spring loaded, and this little thing comes down with a surprising amount of force. If you got a knuckle or something down here when you push this thing over, it'll come down and slap right on the top of your fingers, and it can really hurt. So do watch. You always want to have a bunch of these extra in your toolbox. They're very easy to lose, but when you snap those things on, just make sure your fingers are out of the way. One maintenance item that's sometimes overlooked is these balls themselves. As your 3-point hitch kind of gets dirty and is used, or if your tractor sits for a long time, these things can start to seize up inside of the arm and become difficult to move. Now, it's fairly easy to break loose, right? You can put a punch through or a pin and tap it with a hammer and break the thing loose again, but ideally you don't want to have to do that. So the way that you want to maintain these balls is by putting some kind of penetrating oil on them in order to keep them loose. I've seen some guys before take grease and put grease on these. Generally, that's not what we would recommend because that grease can pick up dirt, but some kind of penetrating oil is going to keep these things from rusting in place and keep them easy to move so that you can twist them around when you get up to your implement and maybe not have to kick them quite as hard to get them in place. There is an interaction between all these adjustments when you have an implement on the back, and one of them that I'd say to watch out for is the interaction between the top link and the side link when it comes to leveling an angled implement. So the thing that I have in mind here specifically would be something like a rear blade or a landscape rake where you have that piece twisted sideways. When that piece is twisted sideways, if it's not level up and down, which is adjusted with your top link, you don't have that top link to the point that your attachment points here are level, the end of that angled attachment is going to be hanging up in the air. And I've seen guys before try to correct that by then coming over to their side link and cranking this around to bring that back down again. And that's not the right place to be making that adjustment. When you put your attachment on, you're going to use your top link here to bring that attachment to being basically level. Now, it's not something you got to go snap out your builder's level and your builder's square to get everything straight behind your tractor. None of these things need to be that precise. But when you look at your attachment, you want to have these pieces basically straight up and down and not racked way forward or way back when things are going up and down. Another attachment issue with your 3-point hitch, I would say, is the way that guys will use these sway bars sometimes, or your turnbuckles if you have the threaded style. When you have these things on and you've attached the implement to your tractor, you have some flexibility in how rigid that implement is behind the machine. And I would say that by and large, guys tend to over-tighten things. If you have, say, a mower or a ground engaging implement, you want a little bit of slop back here, so if that implement strikes a rock or something hard or catches a tree on a turn, it's able to swing out of the way a little bit. If you notice on these 3-point hitch sway bars, there's an attachment point in here that allows this arm some flexibility to move back and forth. And by and large, for many of your implements, if you're running in those situations where you could strike something, I absolutely would recommend that you be using those holes. There's other places in here that you're going to be able to tighten things down, and that would be for, say, ballast boxes and that kind of stuff that aren't going to, be slopping around behind your tractor where you don't want them moving and you're not concerned about hitting things. So keep that in mind, that flexibility of these things to sway and the ability of your implement to move can prevent damage and bending of sheet metal and those kinds of things by allowing that implement a little bit of flexibility to bounce off of things. Now, this isn't the 3-point hitch itself, but it becomes such a common issue for us when guys are attaching the implement on the back of their tractor. These 3-point quick hitches may be a little bit oversold in their ability to quickly quick hitch to an implement, right? They can be really, really nice when you have implements that are the proper dimensions and the pins fall into exactly the right place. Simply by lifting these arms up, you're now able to back into your implement, pick it up, and lock it in place without futzing around with your 3-point hitch arms like you often have to do. I also like these a lot on smaller tractors where we can offset the implement a little bit further back behind the machine and potentially not have to cut our PTO shafts down the length in order to fit onto a smaller tractor. So they have their place. Where they get frustrating, though, in terms of our 3-point hitch is that we tend to oversell the ability of these things to work on a variety of implements. So unfortunately, the 3-point hitch standard really says a whole lot more about pins and their sizes and capacities than it does about any physical dimensions of the back of this hitch. And so for that reason, you find a lot of implements, particularly older ones and stuff that's imported from overseas, that doesn't follow this standard very well. And when you go and you try to pick things up with the 3-point hitch, quick hitch, you'll find they don't fit. And it is probably about a 50-50 for most of the implements that you'll see out there. So if you're shopping for newer equipment, you can follow manufacturer price books, and in the case of Lampride and some other companies, they'll even put stickers on here that will say whether their implements are quick hitch compatible or not. So that's something you want to look for when you're shopping for your implements if you want that quick hitch functionality. So those are 5 common pitfalls we'll see when guys are making adjustments on their 3-point hitch. If you have any need for, say, 3-point hitch hardware, pins, clevises, you name it, we've got it all. It's available for sale on our website, www.messick.com, or you can give us a call at 800-222-3373. Attachments mistakes that we see guys make when you're new to tractors and you're attaching all of this hardware onto an implement the first time. You're going to find there's a lot of adjustment. Yep. Neil from Messick's here to talk with you. What did I say this video was even called?